Greetings. My name is David Ramazani. On my last video, I talked about Persia from the Bible's perspective. Today, I'm going to talk about the legacy of Zarathustra. So, before I do so, let me share one of my diagrams so I can explain what I'm going to talk about. Okay. Now, at the top, this is Lydia, top right corner. That's where first time the philosophy was born. The philosophy was born in Miletus, which is on the southwest of Anatolia or Turkey. So this is the corner, Miletus, where the philosophy, the Greek philosophy, was born. And that's where I'm going to start talking about the legacy of Zarathustra. The first philosopher was Thales of Miletus. And the second one is Anaximander. Anaximander was the second philosopher that was also from this corner of today's Turkey. That's the area they were living. And the third one is the Anaximanders from Miletus. These are the three main philosophers who were living right here in Miletus. And Miletus was part of Lydia. And Lydia, or the Lydian Empire, was conquered and colonized by Cyrus the Great. There was a battle. There were two battles, Pteria and Tambra. So during these two battles, the second one at 547 BC, and Cyrus took over Lydia. And that's the first time when you see the Persian mind and the Greek mind, they meet. First time in the history, you have two groups of people, the Persians on one hand, and the Greeks on the other hand. They meet and they talk face to face. This is the beginning of the birth of Greek philosophy. So the three main philosophers of that time, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximanders. That's where by these three philosophers, the Western philosophy or the Greek philosophy was born. But it only happened because the Zoroastrian Persians or the Zoroastrian Magi's and Greek thinkers, or the thinkers from Lydia, they meet face to face, they talk to each other, and the conversation between these two groups of people transpired philosophy. It was the fusion of two distinct thoughts, two distinct ideas, and that gave birth to Greek philosophy. They both inspired each other. They both, because they had, each side has a unique set of ideas, unique set of thoughts. And when these two meet, that's what gave birth to philosophy. Now, the Iranian thinkers, they were Zoroastrians. So they injected Zoroastrian thoughts into the Greek mind. They were able to impregnate the Greek thinking. And as a result, philosophy was born. So that is the legacy of Zarathustra, giving birth to philosophy for the first time in history. Before the Egyptians, before the Indians, before the Chinese, before the Romans, it was these two methods of thinking that gave birth to philosophy. Before that, there was no philosophy. And it continued, this way of thinking, this methodology, this thought process kept evolving until today, and it continues to evolve and to grow. So that's important. This location is very important. The geography is important. And the way it happened, only it was because of, it happened after this battle, the Battle of Thimbra. And that's when the two sides meet and talk and discuss. So this is a turning point in history in terms of thinking development, the thought process. And then it continues, and then we have Pythagoras. Pythagoras spent about 12 years, maybe more, in Babylon. Babylon was the second capital of the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. And he initially was in Egypt when Darius the Great decided to go and capture Egypt. Then he discovered that Pythagoras was in Egypt and he was studying the pyramids. And he asked his army to politely and very respectfully to invite Pythagoras to go to the Persian capital, Babylon. And he actually accepted. He went to the Babylon, and for 12 years, maybe more, he held discussions and conversations with the Moabites, with the intellectual and thinkers, Zoroastrian intellectual and thinkers. And in fact, he was the first philosopher who used the word philosophy for himself. He labeled himself a philosopher. And the way he created this word, he discovered that the Persians had a word, mazdiasna, which literally means the worship of wisdom. That's the literal meaning of mazdiasna. And it meant the worship of wisdom. So he took that term and he created philosophy, which means the love of wisdom. So he called it the love of wisdom. The Persians called it the worship of wisdom. And that's how he invented or first discovered it from the Persians. So Pythagoras took the Persian ideas that he learned within this 12-year period. He took with him, he went to south of Italy, and he formed his academy, teaching there. Then after Pythagoras, we have Heraclitus of Ephesus. And Heraclitus was invited by the Darius to become a court philosopher for the Persians. Heraclitus refused it. He didn't think he suited for the court because in the court you see the king, you see the entourage, you see the diplomats. So it was a different lifestyle that Heraclitus that didn't think he can make adjustment for that kind of a lifestyle. And so he refused that, but the reason Darius invited him because he knew that Heraclitus' philosophy was very similar to the Zoroastrian philosophy, very similar to the Persian philosophy. That was the reason he invited him. That was the reason he was interested in Heraclitus, because of the common thinking, the common ground that existed between the Persian thoughts and the philosophy of Heraclitus. So they were that close. The similarities were a lot. So after Heraclitus, we have Aeschylus. Aeschylus is the father of tragedy, father of Greek tragedy. And he has one tragedy he wrote. It was called The Persians. And the other one was the Prometheus trilogy that he developed, both of them. And in the Prometheus trilogy, he helped Prometheus to develop from an obscure titan into a major god, major titan, a good god. And but the ideas that Aeschylus absorbed was from the teachings of Zarathustra. He took the features, the attributes of Ahura Mazda, and he gave those to the Prometheus. And so that's how he transformed Prometheus and promoted him to much higher position among the Greek mythology, within the Greek mythology. And so that's where Aeschylus learned, like firebringer. Fire is a Persian concept, and it represents Asha, the truth. So he took all that and then gave it to Prometheus. I'm not suggesting that there is a direct relationship between Ahura Mazda and Prometheus, but what I am suggesting is that many of the attributes that are given to Prometheus by Aeschylus was borrowed from the original teachings of Zarathustra and from Ahura Mazda, and then gave it to the Prometheus. So that's the connection. The connection is Aeschylus is bridging the Zoroastrian deity, Ahura Mazda, with Prometheus, a Greek titan, mythological titan. So Aeschylus is the father of Greek tragedy. It's in that he gave birth to Greek tragedy, his writings. And so he labeled Prometheus a firebringer, and which was the antithesis of Zeus. So we have Zeus, we have Prometheus. Prometheus is antithesis of Zeus. Then we have Herodotus, who is a historian, Herodotus, and that most of the history that he writes, it's about the Persian Empire, most of his writings. Herodotus, he wrote 9 books, and 7 of them are related to the Persian Empire. Then we have Xenophon, and he wrote the Cyropedia, and it talks about Cyrus's life, his education. And then we have Plato. So all of these people, they were strongly influenced by the original teachings of Zarathustra. So as I indicated, from the time and the place when philosophy was born, it was as a result of the Persian thinking as well as Greek thinking. And the fusion of these two thoughts gave birth to philosophy. And these are the people who were directly influenced by the original teachings of Zarathustra. And so this is the first part of my discussion. Now, there's another part to this, and that's when we have philosophy since European Renaissance. So let me share with you another diagram, which I'm going to talk about the philosophy of. Okay, so I'm going to share this one. All right. This is a different diagram. And here I'm showing you all the philosophers since the European Renaissance. And at the top, this green, this is the European Renaissance. On my left, this is the statue of Prometheus. So what happens when the European Renaissance starts? All the focus is shifted. We see a paradigm shift that now the Europeans, Renaissance was a cultural movement. So all the elite of this movement, they are now focused on the philosophy before the Greek philosophy, before the Dark Ages, before the Middle Ages. So the focus shifted from church onto philosophy. And so we have Marsilio Ficini, the Italian, and maybe we can say that Marsilio was the first philosopher since the beginning of Renaissance. And he was influenced by the teachings of Zarathustra. And Giovanni, another Italian, he was also influenced by the teachings of Zarathustra. And Giordano Bruno, he was also influenced by the teachings of Zarathustra. These are the main Renaissance philosophers. And they discovered Zarathustra or Zoroastrianism, and they used their thoughts, the Zoroastrian thoughts. Zoroastrian thoughts are focused on self-perfection, individualism, personal responsibility, individual responsibility, and continuous self-improvement. These are the main theme of Zarathustra's original teachings. And although the Zoroastrianism, an old worldview, but the teachings are very modern. because the teachings are about individual responsibility, it's about individualism, which was discovered during the Enlightenment era. So it's a very old idea, it's an ancient idea, but it is a modern thinking. This is what makes Zarathustra so unique, something that we developed or discovered during the Renaissance or during the Enlightenment, but already existed 2,500 years ago, maybe even longer. So these concepts were already developed, but it was forgotten. And the reason being forgotten was that Islam, the conquest of Persian Empire by the Muslim Arabs, destroyed the Zoroastrian ideas, destroyed the Zoroastrian worldview, destroyed the Zoroastrian philosophy. That's why this thinking, this worldview was forgotten, because Islam replaced it in Persian Empire. But fortunately, it was rediscovered since the beginning of European Renaissance. So that's the good thing happened. We are so fortunate that we have had European Renaissance, so we can go back in history and rediscover the original teachings of Zarathustra. And these are the people that they rediscovered these teachings. Marsilio, Ficinio, Giovanni, okay, another thinker, Italian thinker. And Giordano Brano. Giordano Brano, they burned him. The church, the Catholic Church, they burned him alive on a stick. So that was unfortunate, but these are the people that they rediscovered the Zoroastrian teachings. And in the case of Giordano Brano, he wanted to synchronize, he wanted to mix Zoroastrianism and Hermeticism and Neoplatonism. So three major thoughts, three major philosophy. He wanted to synchronize all these three, and from the synthesizing these three elements and develop a new worldview. And he wanted to be inclusive, all-inclusive worldview for the during the European Renaissance. That was the cultural movement that started and brought humanism, individualism. And what is so beautiful about this, the core concept of democracy is individualism. So as you can see that Zoroastrianism, or the teachings of Zarathustra, although it is ancient, it's very old. It's from 2,500 years ago. but yet it has incorporated so much of modern ideas in it. So Zoroastrianism carries through the history all this modern thinking, modern lifestyle, and the modernity is already in it, such as individualism, such as democracy. That's what makes Zarathustra, or the legacy of Zarathustra, so unique. And the beauty is the teachings of Zarathustra, it resonates both with the secular society as well as it resonates with the religious thinking. So it is a two-dimensional worldview. It resonates with the secular society. It also resonates with the religious society. And it bridges them together. That is so unique. That's so profound. To be able to connect to the both sides, to the religious thinking as well as to the secular thinking. So this is so important for us to know that we already have a worldview, a philosophy that can bridge. We have a unique philosophy that can bridge the religious side with the secular side, can connect with both sides. It's the Zoroastrian legacy. That's the legacy that we are talking about. Then we have Voltaire, that he took interest in Ahura Mazda, in Zarathustra, and some of the key figures, like Goethe, he was influenced both by Hafiz and by Zarathustra. And Nietzsche was influenced by Goethe. And then we have Hegel. He was very much influenced by the teachings of Zarathustra. And what Hegel did, he was a comparative scholar. So what does the comparative scholar do? They take multiple worldviews or different philosophies or different religions, and they compare them with each other. They compare to find the common ground between these various religions or philosophies. And that's what Hegel was doing. And so he discovered the Zarathustra in his comparative study or comparative analysis. And we have Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer, he was interested in the Eastern religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Zoroastrianism. And so Arthur, he believed in that will to live, and he believed that life is driven by an irrational, blind force that causes suffering. Schopenhauer believed in suffering. He was a pessimist philosopher, and it is his philosophy in terms of will to live and the fact that there are two forces that they are battling with each other, and it causes suffering. It is similar to the cosmic or the eternal struggle between the good and evil that Zarathustra talks about. The dualism that Zarathustra talks about resonated with Schopenhauer and his philosophy of will to live, and that's how he became interested in Zarathustra. And then we have Ralph Waldo Emerson. But the key figure is Nietzsche. Nietzsche was influenced by Emerson. He was also influenced by Goethe, and Nietzsche took interest in Zarathustra. He wrote the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He is the one that developed metaphilosophy, and he thought that the era of philosophy is finished. Now we will be entering into metaphilosophy, and he talks about Übermensch, so superhuman. And his Übermensch is very similar to the Zoroastrian concept of Ashavan. And Asha, which is represented by fire, and it means truth, knowledge, wisdom, honesty. And so Nietzsche learned about this concept, Ashavan, from Zarathustra, and then he used it in his own philosophy and developed the Übermensch. So Nietzsche was very much influenced by the original teachings of Zarathustra. And so he's the one that says that he coined the phrase, God is dead, and he was referring to the Christian God. And so his antagonism with the Christian teachings, although his father was a minister, a priest, but anyway, he was a philologist, and he became interested in Zoroaster or Zarathustra, and because of his skill in philology, he was able to read the old scripture, and that's how he discovered Zarathustra. Then we have James Darmasteter. He's a French, and he also very much was interested in Zarathustra. Same as Carl Jung, a psychologist. So we have both the philosophers who were interested in Zarathustra, as well as the psychologists who were interested in Zarathustra. And Then we have Martin Heidegger. Okay, Heidegger is a little different. Heidegger was not directly influenced by Zarathustra. He developed his own philosophy. He shares some of the common ground in his philosophy with Zarathustra. So it's important to see the distinction. Heidegger is different than like from Nietzsche, although Heidegger was influenced by Nietzsche, but the difference between Heidegger and Nietzsche is that Nietzsche, he rediscovered Zarathustra or Zoroaster. In the case of Heidegger, he did not rediscover, or he was not directly influenced. Unlike Nietzsche, he was not directly influenced by Zarathustra, but his philosophy shares some of the thoughts from Zarathustra. So there is a common ground between Heidegger and Zarathustra. And then we have Jean-Paul Sartre. Same thing. Jean-Paul Sartre, he developed the philosophy of existentialism. His existentialist philosophy shares common ground with Zarathustra, because the way you get to existentialism is through individualism. And that's what Zarathustra developed, that individualism, that individual responsibility, individual perfection, personal responsibility. And so that concept of individualism, which leads into existentialism, and that's where you find the common ground between Sartre's philosophy with Zarathustra. So you see, all these philosophers, they share, they either have rediscovered Zarathustra and they were directly influenced by Zarathustra, or they developed a concept or an idea or a philosophy which shares some of the common ground with Zarathustra, like Heidegger and Sartre. So you see how different philosophers have been influenced by the teachings of Zarathustra. Some of them directly, some of them indirectly. So I want to separate those and see the distinction. And so the fact that Prometheus was rediscovered since the beginning of European Renaissance, and the fact that so many of them, Zarathustra's original teachings, were rediscovered since the beginning of European Renaissance. And then that line of thinking, that philosophy continues. You know, we come from Voltaire, and then Goethe, Hegel, Arthur Schopenhauer and Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nietzsche, and Carl Jung, all the way to Heidegger and Jean-Paul Sartre. So this is the legacy of Zarathustra that I wanted to introduce, that I wanted to talk about, and show how in today's modern thinking, in today's modern philosophy, we still have a great deal of common ground with the original teachings of Zarathustra. So that old, ancient philosophy of Zarathustra, it is carried over through the history, and we are still living with it, as if Zarathustra is living with us, because his thoughts, his teachings, his philosophy is with us. We are using it every day. That's individualism. That's democracy. It is through individualism you can develop the democracy. Individualism leads into democracy. So, what does that mean? That means if we didn't have Islam in Iran, in Persia, if we didn't have the conquest of Persian Empire by the Bedouin Muslim Arabs 1400 years ago, and if the Persians or the Iranians were still Zoroastrian and they were living with their own original culture, with their own original philosophy, or with their own original religion of Zoroastrianism, we would have had individualism born long before what happened in Europe. So the Persian individualism would have been born long before the European individualism. And that would have led into democracy. So we would have had democracy long before the European democracy. And humanity would have been far ahead than where we are now. But because of this detour, because we digressed from the original teachings of Zarathustra, because Zoroastrianism was destroyed by Islam, the humanity fell behind. We discovered individualism very later in history. And it was followed by democracy later. We could have had all this benefits, all this lifestyle, all this modernity, long before then the Europeans got there, if only, if and only if we didn't have Islam in Iran. See, that conquest of Persian Empire delayed for many centuries, for several hundred years, maybe for 1,000 years, delayed individualism, delayed democracy, delayed modern philosophy, delayed so many things just because of destroying the Zoroastrianism in Persia, in Iran. See, it put us so far behind in history just because of this conquest that took place, conquest of Persian Empire. Just imagine how far ahead we would have been if we didn't have Islam in Iran. Maybe 1,000 years ahead. To say that is not an exaggeration. To say we would have been 1,000 years ahead where we are now, it's not an exaggeration. So this is a catastrophe that took place, because so many modern ideas would have been born out of Zarathustra's original teachings, would have been born out of Zoroastrianism. So many modern thinking, so many modern ideas, so many modern concepts would have been developed much sooner in history. We didn't have to wait for European Renaissance. But the humanity suffered all of this just because what happened 1,400 years ago when the Muslim Arabs, they conquered Persian Empire. They defeated Sassanid dynasty. We lost all that opportunity. We lost so much. We suffered so much just because what Islam did to Persian Empire. Because of that, humanity suffered. We fell so far behind. Because we can see that. We can see the legacy of Zarathustra, how it was carried over through the history. So I'm gonna leave you with that. And so there are two parts that I talked about. There was a legacy of Zarathustra. This was before Renaissance, that it comes through the pre-Socratic philosophy, and then Socratic philosophy after Socrates and Plato, and then until it comes to the Dark Ages, Middle Ages. And then the second part, the beginning of the European Renaissance. So these were the two parts of philosophical thinking, or the development of the philosophical thinking of two parts, before European Renaissance and after European Renaissance. Both have been strongly influenced by the original teachings of Zarathustra. And that's what I wanted to show by tracing and tracking how this thought process have been fluid and flow through the history until today, and we become the recipient, we become the beneficiaries of these philosophical thinking and the legacy of Zarathustra. Until my next video, wish you all health. This is the Persian New Year. It's called Nowruz. So I want to wish everyone happy Nowruz. And until my next video, I say goodbye. See you on my next video.